Hello and welcome to the Oak Tree English Poetry live stream. Today we're going to finish off what we started yesterday. We're going to go on with our journey through history via poetry. Yesterday we finished up with the Tudors, notably Henry V and Henry VIII. Today we're starting with a folk verse from the time of King James I, 6th of Scotland. And of course, that infamous gunpowder plot. Remember, the 5th of November, the gunpowder treason and plot. I know of no reason why the gunpowder treason should ever be forgot. Guy Fawkes and his companions did the scheme contrive to blow the king and parliament all up alive. 70 barrels laid below to prove old England's overthrow. But by God's providence him they catch with a dark lantern and a lighting match. A stick and a stake for King James' sake. You won't give me one, I'll take two, the better for me and the worse for you. A rope to hang the Pope, a penn'orth of cheese to choke him, a pint of beer to wash it down, and a jolly good fire to burn him. Holla, boys, holla, make the bells ring. Holla, boys, holla, God save the king. Hip, hip, hooray! Of course, not everyone liked King James I. The gunpowder plot actually, ironically, did a lot to boost his confidence and boost his standing with the people because of verses like that. But later, people who have looked back on him have a slightly less favourable view on him. This is what Rudyard Kipling thought of James I. The child of Mary, Queen of Scots, a shifty mother's shiftless son, bred up among intrigues and plots, learned in all things, wise in none, ungainly, babbling, wasteful, weak, shrewd, clever, cowardly, pedantic. The sight of steel would blanch his cheek, the smell of baccy drive him frantic. He was the author of his line. He wrote that witches should be burnt. He wrote that monarchs were divine, and left a son who proved they weren't. Of course, said son was Charles I. Most interesting thing about Charles I is that he was 5'2" at the beginning of his reign and 4'9" at the end of it. I'll let you do the maths. Of course, later on, we end up with we go through a civil war and stuff like that, and we end up with some Georges. We pass a law that says that a Catholic cannot be King of England, and therefore we have to skip about 50 people to go and find another king. And the one we found, well, he was German, and he didn't really like England very much, which made him very sad. His name was George. He was George I. And he gave away a lot of the power of the monarchy because he didn't really understand what was happening. He gave us a prime minister and passed a lot of the powers of the king over to the prime minister. Personally, I think that's probably a good thing because he was followed by a very bad king who was also called George II. And George II had a lot of fights with lots of people, including his grandson, George, who was called George, and he became George III. You see how this is going, yeah? Unfortunately, George III was insane. There's a whole film about it called The Madness of King George, and lots of other things, including, of course, Blackadder III. Well worth a view. King George III was mad. So his son, who he called, now what was it? George. He came to he sort of was regent, and we have lots of regency architecture and things like that. He was a bit of a wastrel. He wasted a lot of money on various architectural schemes, really to the detriment of the people that he was ruling, but left us behind the Brighton Pavilion, so we can't be too hard on him. And Buckingham Palace. And George IV, as he later became, was mostly known for being fat. Let's have a quick recap. We have sad, bad, mad, and fat. And this was the reign of the King Georges, the Georgian era. And it is from this Georgian era that I now turn to read Highwayman by Alfred Noyes. The wind was a torrent of darkness among the gusty trees. The moon was a ghostly galleon tossed upon cloudy seas. The road was a ribbon of moonlight over the purple moor, and the highwayman came riding, riding, riding. The highwayman came riding up to the old inn door. He'd a French cocked hat on his forehead and a bunch of lace at his chin, a coat of claret velvet and breeches of brown doeskin. They fitted with never a wrinkle. His boots were up to the thigh, and he rode with a jewelled twinkle. His pistol butts a twinkle, his rapier hilt a twinkle, under the jewelled sky. Over the cobbles he clattered and clashed in the dark inn yard, and he tapped with his whip on the shutters, but all was locked and barred. He whistled a tune to the window, and who should be waiting there but the landlord's black-eyed daughter, Bess, the landlord's daughter, plaiting a dark red love knot into her long black hair. And dark in the old inn yard, a stable wicket creaked, where Tim, the ostler, listened. His face was white and peaked. His eyes were hollows of madness, his hair like mouldy hay. But he loved the landlord's daughter, the landlord's red-lipped daughter. Dumb as a dog he listened, and he heard the robber say, "One kiss, my bonny sweetheart. I'm after a prize tonight, but I shall be back with the yellow gold before the morning light. Yet, if they press me sharply and harry me through the day, then look for me by moonlight, watch for me by moonlight. I'll come to thee by moonlight, though hell should bar the way." He rose upright in the stirrups. He scarce could reach her hand, but she loosed her hair in the casement. His face burned like a brand, as the black cascade of perfume came tumbling over his breast, and he kissed its waves in the moonlight. Oh, sweet black waves in the moonlight. Then he tugged at his rein in the moonlight and galloped away to the west. He did not come in the dawning. He did not come at noon. And out of the tawny sunset, before the rise of the moon, when the road was a gypsy's ribbon looping the purple moor, a redcoat troop came marching, marching, marching. King George's men came marching up to the old inn door. They said no word to the landlord. They drank his ale instead, but they gagged his daughter and bound her to the foot of her narrow bed. Two of them knelt at her casement with muskets at their side. There was death at every window, and hell at one dark window, for Bess could see through her casement the road that he would ride. They had tied her up to attention with many a sniggering jest. They had bound a musket beside her with the barrel beneath her breast. "Now keep good watch," and they kissed her. She heard the dead man say, "Look for me by moonlight, watch for me by moonlight. I'll come to thee by moonlight, though hell should bar the way." She twisted her hands behind her, but all the knots held good. She writhed her hands till her fingers were wet with sweat or blood. They stretched and strained in the darkness, and the hours crawled by like years, till now on the stroke of midnight, cold on the stroke of midnight, the tip of one finger touched it. The trigger, at least, was hers. The tip of one finger touched it. She strove no more for the rest. Up she stood to attention, with the barrel beneath her breast. She would not risk their hearing. She would not strive again, for the road lay bare in the moonlight, blank and bare in the moonlight. and the blood of her veins in the moonlight throbbed to her love's refrain. Clot, 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 had they heard it? The horse hoofs ringing clear? Clot, 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 clot in the distance. Were they deaf that they did not hear? Down the ribbon of moonlight, over the brow of the hill, the highwayman came riding, riding, riding. The redcoats looked to their priming. She stood up, straight and still. Trot, trot in the frosty silence, trot, trot in the echoing night. Nearer he came and nearer. Her face was like a light. Her eyes grew wide for a moment. She drew one last deep breath. Then her finger moved in the moonlight. Her musket shattered the moonlight, shattered her breast in the moonlight, and warned him with her death. He turned, he spurred to the westward. He did not know who stood, bowed with her head o'er the musket, drenched with her own red blood. Not till the dawn he heard it. His face grew grey to hear how Bess, the landlord's daughter, the landlord's black-eyed daughter, had watched for her love in the moonlight and died in the darkness there. Back he spurred like a madman, shrieking a curse to the sky, with the white road smoking behind him and his rapier brandished high. Blood red were his spurs in the golden noon, wine red was his velvet coat, when they shot him down on the highway. Down like a dog on the highway. And he lay in his blood on the highway, with a bunch of lace at his throat. And still, of a winter's night, they say, when the wind is in the trees, when the moon is a ghostly galleon tossed upon cloudy seas, when the road is a ribbon of moonlight over the purple moor, a highwayman comes riding, riding, riding. A highwayman comes riding up to the old inn door. Over the cobbles he clatters and clangs in the dark inn yard. He taps with his whip on the shutters, but all is locked and barred. He whistles a tune to the window. And who should be waiting there but the landlord's black-eyed daughter, Bess, the landlord's daughter, plaiting a dark red love knot into her long black hair. Yesterday I read something by Alfred Lord Tennyson. I read Lady of Shalott, and I wore my Tennyson hat for it. But my Tennyson hat is downstairs today because I wore it yesterday in the rain. So you'll just have to imagine me looking a bit more like Tennyson. As I read for you an account of an event from the Crimean War. That's the whole Florence Nightingale thing, called the Charge of the Light Brigade. Half a league, half a league, half a league onward, all in the valley of death rode the 600. Forward the Light Brigade, charge for the guns, he said. Into the valley of death rode the 600. Forward the Light Brigade, was there a man dismayed? Not though the soldier knew someone had blundered. Theirs not to make reply, theirs not to reason why, theirs but to do and die. Into the valley of death rode the 600. Cannon to right of them, cannon to left of them, cannon in front of them, volleyed and thundered. Stormed at with shot and shell, boldly they rode and well. Into the jaws of death, into the mouth of hell, rode the 600. Flashed all their sabres bare, flashed as they turned in air, sabring the gunners there, charging an army while all the world wondered. Plunged in the battery smoke, right through the line they broke. Cossack and Russian reeled from the sabre stroke, shattered and sundered. Then they rode back, but not the 600. Cannon to right of them, cannon to left of them, cannon behind them, volleyed and thundered. Stormed at with shot and shell, while horse and hero fell. They that had fought so well came through the jaws of death, back from the mouth of hell, all that was left of them, left of 600. When can their glory fade? Oh, the wild charge they made. All the world wondered. Honour the charge they made. Honour the Light Brigade. Noble 600. Yeah, mismanagement isn't a new thing, is it? If you actually look at the history of the charge of the Light Brigade, absolutely disgusting decisions made by the leadership over these men that led to an absolute slaughter. However, speaking of slaughter, let's go back to the British Empire. The British Empire was a great and beneficent organization, a family of nations gathered together and never did anything wrong in its entire history. The crimes of the British Empire are extremely well recorded and also extremely well documented, so I don't need to go into any detail there. No one is claiming that the British Empire was a good thing. No one, that is, except for Rudyard Kipling. Rudyard Kipling wrote this about the Boer War down in South Africa against the Dutch, who later the settlers became the speakers of Afrikaans, etc. The poem is called Piet, and it's spelled P-I-E-T, which is the Afrikaans way of spelling Piet. And like I did with Gunga Din, I have to do this in a London accent because that's the way it's written. I do not love my empire's foes, nor call them angels still. What is the sense of hating those whom you are paid to kill? So, barring all that foreign lot which only join for spite, myself I'd just as soon as not respect the man I fight. Ah, there Pete, his trousers to his knees, his coat tails lying level in the bullet-sprinkled breeze. He does not lose his rifle, and he does not lose his seat. I've known a lot of people ride a damn sight worse than Pete. I've heard him crying from the ground like Abel's blood of old, and skirmished out to look and found the beggar nearly cold. I've waited on till he was dead, which couldn't help him much, but many grateful things he said to me for doing such. Ah, there Pete, whose time has come to die, his carcass past rebellion, but his eyes inquiring, why? Though dressed in stolen uniform with badger rank complete, I've known a lot of fellas go a damn sight worse than Pete. And when there wasn't out to do but camp and cattle guards, I fought with him the whole day through at 1,500 yards. Long afternoons are lying still, and hearing as you lay, the bullets swish from hill to hill like scythes among the hay. Ah, there Pete, behind his stony cop, with his boar bread and biltong, his flask got awful dop. His mares are for amusement and his pony for a treat. I've known a lot of fellas shoot a damn sight worse than Pete. He shoved his rifle neath my nose before I'd time to think, and borrowed all my Sunday clothes and sent me home in pink. And I have crept, Lord how I've crept, on hands and knees I've gone, and spored and floored and caught and kept, and sent him to Ceylon. Ah, there Pete, you've sold me many a pup. When week on week alternate, it was you and me, hands up. But though I never made you walk man naked in the heat, I've known a lot of fellas stalk a damn sight worse than Pete. From Plumans to Marabastard, from Ukeep to DR, me and me trusty friend have had, as you might say, a war. But seeing what both parties done before he owned defeat, I ain't more proud of having won than I am pleased with Pete. Ah, there Pete, picked up behind the drive. The wonder wasn't how he fought, but how he kept alive. With nothing in his belly, on his back or to his feet, I've known a lot of men behave a damn sight worse than Pete. No more I'll hear his rifle crack along the blockhouse fence. The beggar's on the peaceful tack, regardless of expense. For counting what he eats and draws, and gifts and loans as well, he's getting half the earth because he didn't give us hell. Ah, there, Pete, with your brand new English plough, your gratis tents and cattle, and your most ungrateful frau. You've made the British taxpayer rebuild your country seat. I've known some pet battalions charge a damn sight less than Pete. Ah, the reparations. Yes. Of course, we didn't stop. Our empire didn't stop until we ran out of money. And we ran out of money predominantly because of 2 world wars. Those Germans, eh? That was a joke. I love Germans. I have a very close friend who is German, and I absolutely, if you are in Germany, guten Tag und willkommen in dieser Livestream. I expect there's a German word for live stream, but I don't know what it is. Stream is Bach, like Feuerbach for fire stream, and also a second-rate philosopher. But Bavarian, so we let him off because I like Bavaria. Okay, we're going to move on now to the First World War, when the image of the armed forces changed a little bit, or needed to change a little bit. We're going to stick with Rudyard Kipling because he's cool, and we're going to a poem called Tommy, which is one my father used to read to me. I appear to have a viewer. It would be very nice if said viewer would be willing to write something in the live chat to say hello to me. If not, that's fine. I went into a public house to get a pint of beer. The publican he up and says, "We serve no redcoats here." The girls behind the bar, they laughed and giggled fit to die. I outs into the streets again, and to myself says I, "Oh, it's Tommy this and Tommy that, and Tommy go away." But it's thank you, Miss Atkins, when the band begins to play. The band begins to play, my boys, the band begins to play. Oh, it's thank you, Mr. Atkins, when the band begins to play. I went into a theatre, as sober as could be. They gave a drunk civilian room, but hadn't none for me. They sent me to the gallery or ran the music halls. But when it comes to fighting, Lord, they'll shove me in the stalls. For it's Tommy this and Tommy that and Tommy way outside. But it's special train for Atkins when the troopers on the tide. The troop ship's on the tide, my boys, the troop ship's on the tide. Oh, it's special train for Atkins when the troopers on the tide. Yes, making mocker uniforms that guard you while you sleep is cheaper than them uniforms, and they're starvation cheap. And hustling drunken soldiers when they go in large a bit is 5 times better business than parading in full kit. Then it's Tommy this and Tommy that, and Tommy, how's your soul? But it's thin red line of heroes when the drums begin to roll. The drums begin to roll, my boys, the drums begin to roll. Oh, it's thin red line of heroes when the drums begin to roll. We ain't no thin red heroes. No, we ain't no blackguards too. But single men in barracks, most remarkable, like you. And if sometimes our conduct isn't all your fancy paints, why, single men in barracks don't grow into plaster saints. While it's Tommy this and Tommy that and Tommy fall behind, but it's pleased to walk in front, sir, when there's trouble in this wind, the wind. There's trouble in the wind, my boys, there's trouble in the wind. Oh, it's pleased to walk in front, sir, when there's trouble in the wind. You talk about food for us, and schools and fires and all. We'll wait for extra rations if you treat us rational. Don't mess about the cookroom slops, but prove it to our face. The widow's uniform is not the soldier man's disgrace. For it's Tommy this and Tommy that, and chuck him out for brute. But it's saviour of his country when the guns begin to shoot. And it's Tommy this and Tommy that, and anything you please. And Tommy ain't a blooming fool. You bet that Tommy sees. I never really knew anything about the army until I met some soldiers, and I had a complete misapprehension of what the armed forces were, the British armed forces were. I thought we were a conquering people who went out to places like Afghanistan and did all sorts of terrible things over there. But in actual fact, I spoke to some soldiers, and what I found was that's utter rubbish. The soldiers who were out in Afghanistan, for example, the ones that I spoke to, were trying to rebuild their society for them. They were doing an awful lot of work for the people. And I don't think they got the credit for that. That's just hearsay. That's just what I've heard from people. I'm sure there are people with political views on this who could say very many more things. But the action of the individual soldiers, I believe, were better than I gave them credit for. That's my apology to the armed forces. But of course, what soldiers do is sacrifice themselves. If you want, never was this more clear in history than in the First World War, and written about here by Wilfred Owen. Dulce et decorum est. Bent double, like old beggars under sacks, knock-kneed, coughing like hags, we cursed through sludge, till on the haunting flares we turned our backs, and towards our distant rest began to trudge. Men marched asleep. Many had lost their boots, but limped on, bloodshod. All went lame, all blind, drunk with fatigue, deaf even to the hoots of gas shells dropping softly behind. Gas. Gas! Quick, boys! An ecstasy of fumbling, fitting the clumsy helmets just in time. But someone still was yelling out and stumbling, and floundering like a man in fire or lime. Dim through the misty panes and thick green light, as under a green sea, I saw him drowning. In all my dreams, before my helpless sight, he plunges at me, guttering, choking, drowning. If in some smothering dreams you too could pace behind the wagon that we flung him in, and watch the white eyes writhing in his face, his hanging face like a devil sick of sin. If you could hear at every jolt the blood come gargling from the froth-corrupted lungs, obscene as cancer, bitter as the cud of vile, incurable sores on innocent tongues, my friend, you would not tell with such high zest to children ardent for some desperate glory the old lie, dulce et decorum est, pro patria mori. The old lie in question, dulce et decorum est pro patria mori, is a Latin phrase from the Roman poet Horace. It is sweet and fitting to die for one's country. It's not sweet. It is a sacrifice, and it is a sacrifice by which I am able to sit here in freedom to make videos like this. And we owe many men a huge debt of gratitude, which will never be repaid. However, death isn't always a bad thing. Sometimes it can be quite funny, as in the poem about the gold rush in the United States. Again, for this one, I have to put on an accent. It's not very good, so please forgive me. This is, for those who can't place it, I'm putting on an American accent, a generic American accent, because, of course, lots of accents in America. Not as many as in England, but lots. And this is called The Shooting of Dan McGrew. A bunch of the boys were whooping it up in the Malamute saloon. The kid that handles the music box was hitting a ragtime tune. Back of the bar in a solo game sat dangerous Dan McGrew. And watching his luck was his lad of love, the lady that's known as Lou. When out of the night, which was 50 below, and into the din and the glare, there stumbled a miner fresh from the creeks, dog dirty and loaded for bear. He looked like a man with a foot in the grave and scarcely the strength of a louse. Yet he tilted a poke of dust on the bar. They called for drinks on the house. There was none could place the stranger's face, that we searched ourselves for a clue. But we drank his health, and the last to drink was Dangerous Dan McGrew. There's some men that somehow just grip your eyes and hold them hard like a spell. And such was he, and he looked to me like a man who had lived in hell, with a face most hair and the dreary stare of a dog whose day is done, as he watered the green stuff in his glass, and the drops fell one by one. Then I got to figuring who he was and wondering what he'd do. I turned my head, and there watching him was the lady that's known as Lou. His eyes went rubbering round the room, and he seemed in a kind of a daze, till at last that old piano fell in the way of his wondering gaze. The ragtime kid was having a drink, there was no one else on the stool, so the stranger stumbles across the room and flops down there like a fool. The buckskin shirt that was glazed with dirt, he sat, and I saw him sway. Then he clutched the keys with his talon hands. My God, but that man could play! We were ever out in the great alone, where the moon was awful clear. The icy mountains hemmed you in with the silence you most could hear, with only the howl of a timber wolf, and you camped there in the cold, a half-dead thing in a stark, dead world, clean mad for the muck-cold gold. While high overhead, green, yellow, and red, the north lights swept in bars. Then you've a hunch what the music meant. Hunger, and night, and the stars. And hunger, not of the belly kind that's banished with bacon and beans, but the gnawing hunger of lonely men for a home and all that it means. For a fireside far from the cares that are, four walls and a roof above, but oh so crammed full of cozy joy and crowned with a woman's love. A woman dearer than all the world and true as heaven is true. God, how ghastly she looks through her rouge, the lady that's known as Lou. Then, on a sudden, the music changed, so soft that you scarce could hear, but you felt that your life had been looted clean of all that it once held dear. That someone had stolen the woman you loved, that her love was a devil's lie, that your guts were gone and the best for you was to crawl away and die. 'Twas the crying and cry of a heart's despair, and it thrilled you through and through. I guess I'll make it a spread misere, said Dangerous Dan McGrew. The music almost died away. Then it burst like a pent-up flood, and it seemed to say, repay, repay, and my eyes were blind with blood. The thought came back of an ancient wrong, and it stung like a frozen lash. And the lust awoke to kill, then the music stopped with a crash. And the stranger turned, and his eyes they burned in a most peculiar way. In a buckskin shirt that was glazed with dirt, he sat, I saw him sway. Then his lips went in a kind of grin, and he spoke, and his voice was calm. And, boys, says he, you don't know me, and none of you care a damn. But I want to state that my words are straight, and I'll bet my poke they're true. The one of you is a hound of hell, and that one is Dan McGrew. Then I ducked my head, and the lights went out, and two guns blazed in the dark, and a woman screamed, ah! And the lights went up, and two men lay stiff and stark. Pitched on his head and pumped full of lead was Dangerous Dan McGrew, while the man from the creeks lay clutched to the breast of the lady that's known as Lou. These are the simple facts of the case, and I guess I ought to know. They say the stranger was crazed with hooch, and I'm not denying it's so. I'm not so wise as the lawyer guys, but strictly between us two, the woman that kissed him and pinched his poke was the lady that's known as Lou. There we go, yes. And I promised to take you from the Stuarts up to yesterday. I'm not going to sing a Beatles song. Instead, I'm going to read a poem by a chap called Michael Thwaites, who was an Australian poet. I'm not going to attempt an Australian accent because it'll either come out Welsh, London, or for some reason Pakistani. I don't know how that happens. My Australian accent is very close to my London accent, and I just sound silly when I'm doing it. So I'm just going to read it. Just going to read it. It's called A Message to My Grandson. You chose a marvelous morning to be born. Orange edge of dawn, the stars paling, the glassy lake, the diamond autumn air, the sun breaking surf on the Brindabellas. You chose a marvelous morning to be born. Welcome, and I extend an invitation to tour your native city. For a start, the view from Ainsley, quite superlative, delineates Burley Griffin's genius, working, after his death, in listing trees, hills, water, as friends, he hoped, not subjects to his plan. Then we could visit some outstanding features: St. John's, the War Memorial, Civic Centre, the National Library, Parliament House, of course, Regatta Point, the Gardens, Capitol Hill. But those who met you first at your arrival have judged my invitation premature. You were, I hear, quite tired after your journey, found our light trying, though intriguing too. Through flickering lids seemed eager to discover just what was going on, but had some trouble in focusing the things you had in mind. And close observers felt that you were opting for further time to orientate yourself. In point of fact, it seems you waved your hands in general greeting to your father, mother, then, having twice refused some light refreshment, you went to sleep. No explanations needed, my dear fellow. We'll simply do our tour some other time, convenient to yourself. The sun is climbing, the city goes to work, and you are here. You chose a marvelous morning to be born. Thank you for joining me on this tour through history. I hope this has completed it. If you have any questions or any thoughts about themes of poems you would like me to cover in a live stream, please let me know. If there are any poems that you desperately want to hear me read, please let me know. If you really don't like what I'm doing on these live streams, please let me know. Otherwise I won't know, and I'll just keep going. Thank you very much for joining me. Have a wonderful day. Goodbye.